There's a moment right before a crisis hits, when everything still looks perfectly normal. The shelves are stocked, the prices seem familiar, and you convince yourself that nothing major could possibly change overnight. But the truth is, change never asks for permission. It builds quietly, slowly, invisibly until one morning. You walk into a grocery store and realize half the things you always counted on simply aren't there anymore. As 2026 approaches, that silent shift is already underway. And the only people who will feel safe in the coming months are the ones who prepare before the disappearance begins. Number 1, rice crisis. Incoming people assume rice is permanent. They assume it will always be on the bottom shelf, always cheap, always available, always waiting for them. But the world doesn't move according to what people assume, it moves according to pressure. And right now, rice is carrying more pressure than most realize. When a crop feeds half the planet, even the smallest disruption becomes a global ripple. What's coming isn't small at all. Over the last few years, the countries responsible for most of the world's India, land, Vietnam have all faced the same two enemies: extreme heat and unpredictable drought. Yields dropped, water ran short, export limits tightened, and prices quietly climbed while people pretended not to notice. But nature doesn't care about wishes, and markets don't wait for people to wake up. If you've never lived through an export ban, you might not understand how fast rice disappears. It doesn't creep off shelves, it vanishes. Restaurants buy up stock. Families double their storage. Governments secure supply for their own populations, leaving less for international markets. And in that tension, rice becomes exactly what it's always been beneath the surface: a survival food. It's calorie-dense, shelf-stable, inexpensive during good times, and irreplaceable during bad ones. That last part is what makes 2026 dangerous, because the signs aren't soft, they're loud. Countries are already signaling reduced exports. Climate models show another dry agricultural year. Shipping lanes are tightening, and insurance on freight is getting more expensive by the month. People will look back and say they had no idea, but the truth is always there before the panic hits. You just have to look in the right places. Right now, every sign points to rice becoming one of the first foods to either skyrocket in price or disappear in waves. The families who think they can just buy it later will be the ones empty-handed when the shelves start thinning. The families who prepare now will feel something rare during a shortage: calm. Because rice isn't just another ingredient, it's the backbone of stability. When the backbone cracks, everything else becomes harder, more expensive, and more uncertain. Number 2, peanut butter shortage. Peanut butter looks harmless sitting on a shelf, like something that will never go anywhere, the kind of food that feels too ordinary to ever become rare. But ordinary things disappear the fastest, because people only realize their importance when they're gone. Peanut butter is one of those quiet essentials that families depend on without even thinking about it, and that's exactly why the coming shortage will feel so personal. Behind its soft texture and sweet comfort is a truth most people never notice. Peanuts are one of the crops suffering the most from rising heat. The fields that once produced steady, predictable harvests are now struggling under relentless temperatures, inconsistent rainfall, and pest patterns that farmers can't track anymore. Every year, yields shrink a little more, and every year manufacturers push harder to stretch a product that's becoming expensive to produce. But there's another side people forget. Peanut butter isn't just a snack, it's a survival food. High calories, high protein, long shelf life, zero refrigeration. In emergencies, families rely on it the same way they rely on canned meat or rice. And during supply disruptions, that combination turns peanut butter from a comfort food into a panic-buying target. When people feel fear, they don't reach for luxury, they reach for what feels safe. Peanut butter is safety in a jar. That's why stores run out of it during hurricanes, snowstorms, and power outages. Now imagine that same demand happening on a national scale because production can keep up and shipping costs refuse to soften. Manufacturers are already reducing jar sizes, increasing prices, and substituting lower quality ingredients just to keep shelves filled. Most customers don't notice the shrinking ounces or the slightly different texture because change happens slowly until it doesn't. One more season of heat damage, one more year of stressed crops, one more spike in import and transport costs. And peanut butter goes from being an afterthought to a scarcity. And when it disappears, families feel it instantly. It hits school lunches, emergency kits, budget meals, and that comforting sense of normalcy people cling to when the world becomes unpredictable. People will remember peanut butter not because it vanished loudly, but because it vanished quietly, leaving a gap they didn't expect to matter so much. The ones who stocked up before 2026 will be the ones who never feel that sudden emptiness. Number 3. Canned meat disappearing. Canned meat is one of those foods people walk past without thinking. The kind that blends into the background of a grocery aisle until the day it suddenly matters more than anything else. Tuna, chicken, beef, they sit quietly behind their metal walls, waiting for a moment most people hope never arrives. But the truth is, every major crisis in modern history has taught the same lesson. Protein is the first thing to disappear when stability cracks. Canned meat, because it lasts for years without refrigeration, becomes the lifeline everyone reaches for at once. What most shoppers don't know is that this lifeline is already thinning, quietly, steadily, and faster than industry reports are willing to admit. The oceans are producing less tuna each year due to overfishing and rising temperatures that push fish deeper and farther from traditional waters. Harvesting becomes harder, fuel costs rise, and processing plants take the hit long before consumers ever see empty shelves. Chicken isn't in better shape either. Feed prices have skyrocketed, bird flu outbreaks have wiped out millions of hens, and the cost of raising poultry has jumped so sharply that canneries are struggling to maintain production. And when production tightens, it doesn't reduce gradually, it collapses. Factories slow down, shipments shrink, and stores start limiting supply without announcing it. People forget how fragile the protein supply really is. They assume meat is endless because grocery stores hide the complexity behind bright labels and neat shelves. But the truth is simpler and darker. Protein is expensive to produce, sensitive to global instability, and impossible to replace in a diet during hard times. When a shortage hits, the wealthy switch to fresh meat. But the average family turns to canned meat because it's the only reliable, affordable protein left. And that moment is when shelves go empty in hours, not days. Canned meat doesn't shout for attention, but if you pay close enough attention, warnings are already here. Shrinking can sizes, rising prices, fewer brands, and sudden out-of-stock tags in places where the shelves used to be full. The world is quietly sliding toward a protein problem, and by the time most families realize it, canned meat will be the first thing long gone, leaving a gap no one wants to face in the middle of uncertainty. Number 4. Pasta and the wheat problem. Pasta seems like one of the most dependable foods on earth. The kind of item you assume will always cost $1 or $2 and always be sitting on the shelves no matter what the world is going through. It feels stable, predictable, almost comforting in its simplicity. But pasta has a secret weakness that most people overlook entirely. It is only as stable as the wheat it comes from. And right now, wheat is walking into 2026 with more volatility than we've seen in decades. When you look behind the scenes, far past the grocery eye, you find a global system stretched thin by drought, war, transportation, bottlenecks, and rising production costs that never fully return to normal after the pandemic. Every time wheat futures spike, pasta prices follow. It doesn't happen instantly, but it happens with certainty. Farmers pay more for fertilizer. Transportation companies pay more for fuel. Mills struggle with inconsistent harvests. And manufacturers use every trick to keep boxes looking the same while shrinking the contents inside. The problem is that wheat instability doesn't calm down quickly. Once the cycle starts, it usually takes several years to correct. And during that time, pasta becomes the quiet victim of a system too strained to keep it cheap or widely available. In Europe, one bad harvest sends shockwaves. In the US, processing bottlenecks magnify the ripple. And in countries that depend heavily on imports, even small disruptions can trigger panic buying. People don't buy one box when they sense uncertainty, they buy 10. They don't think about moderation, they think about survival. And pasta becomes one of the first foods to vanish because it's cheap, filling, and easy to store. That combination makes it a target every single time a crisis hits, which is why shelves emptied so fast in past emergencies. And if 2026 brings even a fraction of the instability economists are warning about, pasta will once again be swept away before most people even realize something is wrong. The danger isn't that pasta is disappearing forever. It's that it disappears exactly when families need it most. And the ones who see the pattern early before the headlines hit and before the price hikes land are the ones who won. TB standing in an aisle staring at an empty shelf, wondering how something so simple could suddenly become so scarce. Number 5. Cooking oil collapse. Cooking oil is one of those household essentials people barely think about until the day it becomes impossible to find. It hides in plain sight, sitting quietly on the bottom shelf, underestimated because it feels so ordinary. But in every major crisis, cooking oil is one of the first items to disappear, not because people suddenly start using more of it, but because its supply chain is one of the most fragile in the entire food system. Sunflower oil, canola oil, soybean oil each. One is tied to regions that have faced repeated conflict, drought, or production cuts over the past few years. When one region fails, companies try to shift to another. But 2025 has already shown that the system no longer has the flexibility it once did. Behind every bottle of cooking oil is a long chain of farmers, mills, refineries, shipping routes, and packaging plants, all of which must work perfectly to deliver something people take for granted. But none of those links are stable right now. Weather patterns are crushing yields. Global conflicts have disrupted exports from major producers, and shipping lanes have become more unpredictable than ever. Even the plastic bottles themselves have grown more expensive due to raw material shortages. When every part of the chain tightens at the same time, the result is always the same: sudden price spikes followed by sudden empty shelves. During emergencies, cooking oil becomes more valuable than almost anything else in a kitchen because it stretches meals, adds calories, preserves food, and keeps simple ingredients edible longer. Families reach for it instinctively when they're trying to make limited food last. That instinct is exactly why, when fear spreads, cooking oil disappears almost overnight. You saw it during global lockdowns: aisles wiped clean, ration signs taped to shelves, and people wandering the store, shocked that something so basic had simply run out. What's coming in 2026 isn't a one-time shortage, it's a continuation of a slow squeeze that has been building for years. And the people who wait until the headlines announce a supply problem will be too late. Cooking oil won't politely warn anyone before it becomes scarce. It will vanish quickly, quietly, and completely, leaving families scrambling to figure out how to cook without one of the most essential ingredients in the modern kitchen. Number 6. Pure honey becoming rare. Honey has always carried a kind of natural magic, a sweetness that feels timeless, almost eternal, as if it will simply always be there. People think of honey as one of the few foods that never spoils. A jar you can forget in the back of a cabinet for years, only to find it perfectly preserved. But the thing most people don't realize is that the real threat to honey isn't spoilage's existence. Honey comes from bees, and bees are disappearing faster than anyone wants to admit. The shelves aren't empty yet, but the fields behind those shelves are growing quieter every year. Beekeepers across the United States and around the world have been reporting the same alarming pattern: colony collapse, weaker hives, unpredictable die-offs, and a struggle to keep bees alive through the changing climate. When bees decline, honey declines with them. It doesn't matter how much demand grows. Nature has limits, and we're hitting them. The world has tried to compensate with imported honey, but even that has become a maze of supply issues, rising transport costs, and a flood of low-quality or counterfeit honey filling the gap. Pure honey, the real stuff, is becoming harder and harder to produce. Honey isn't just a sweetener. It is medicine, energy, preservation, and comfort. In emergencies, people rely on it for healing wounds, soothing throats, storing calories, and replacing sugar when shelves run dry. It lasts indefinitely, which makes it one of the smartest foods to stock during uncertainty. And when people feel instability, they buy foods that feel natural, pure, and safe. Honey checks every one of those boxes. That's why during past shortages, it vanished long before anyone talked about it in the news. As 2026 approaches, the pressure on honey production is hitting a breaking point. Fewer bees mean shorter harvests, lower yields, and higher prices. Large farms are already warning of reduced output, and smaller beekeepers are barely keeping up with demand. The world isn't running out of honey yet, but it's inching closer to a moment where the supply simply can't match the need. And when that moment arrives, honey won't disappear slowly. It will disappear instantly, quietly, and at the worst possible time. The people who set aside a few jars now will never feel the shock that's coming. The ones who wait will wonder how something so ancient became so hard to find. Number 7, the oatmeal problem. Oatmeal is one of those foods that rarely gets any attention. It's mostly because it's humble, quiet, and unassuming. It doesn't brag, it doesn't tempt you with bright packaging, and it never tries to compete with the flashy foods on the shelves. But in moments of instability, it becomes one of the most valuable items a family can have. Oats store for long periods, cook quickly, fill the stomach, and deliver a steady stream of energy. They're the kind of food that keeps you going when everything else feels uncertain. And yet the world is edging closer to a point where oats might become a luxury, rather than the budget-friendly staple people expect. The countries that produce the majority of the world's oats, Canada, the US, Finland, and parts of Northern Europe, have faced growing pressure from climate extremes. Droughts, late-season frosts, heavy rains, and unpredictable temperature swings have made oat harvests increasingly unstable. Some years the crop arrives early, other years late, and some seasons it barely arrives at all. Farmers call oats sensitive, which is just another way of saying that even slight changes in the weather can slash yields. When yields fall, mills reduce production, and shelves quietly thin out long before the public notices what's happening. Oatmeal has another unique challenge. It's a favorite food among people who prepare during uncertain times. When fear rises, whether economic, environmental, or global oat sales spike, people grab bag after bag because they know oats tea spoil quickly, and they stretch meals further than almost anything else. But that same instinct is what triggers shortages. It only takes a small dip in production for demand to outrun supply, and in those moments, oatmeal disappears almost instantly. Prices rise first, packaging sizes shrink, and suddenly, that affordable staple becomes something families hesitate to buy. What makes 2026 concerning is that all the warning signs are already in motion. Grain analysts are predicting tighter supplies, shipping costs remain high, and farms are bracing for another season of unpredictable weather. If the cycle repeats, oats won't just get expensive, they'll get scarce. And the families who rely on them as a dependable, everyday food will feel the pressure first. Oatmeal may seem ordinary, but in a world where stability is slipping, the ordinary becomes essential. And essential foods are always the first to vanish. Number 8. Canned tomatoes. Disappearing canned tomatoes are one of those foods people hardly notice until they reach for them and realize the shelf is empty. They look simple, familiar, and inexpensive, the kind of item you assume will always be there because it has always been there. Yet behind that quiet red can is one of the most unstable crops in the modern food system. Tomatoes may grow easily in a backyard garden, but the tomatoes used for canning require massive harvests, predictable weather, and a delicate balance of supply chain timing. And right now, every single part of that balance is cracking. Tomato crops around the world have been repeatedly hit by extreme heat, water shortages, and crop diseases that spread faster in rising temperatures. In the United States alone, entire regions have seen tomato yields shrink dramatically in recent seasons, and the processors who turn those tomatoes into canned goods are struggling to secure enough raw fruit to meet demand. When a crop fails, processors don't simply make less, they fight over limited supply, push contracts higher, and cut production because there simply isn't enough to can. And when production drops, shelves don't just thin, they empty. Most people don't realize how many foods depend on tomatoes until a shortage hits. Pasta sauce, salsas, soups, chili, stews, pizza sauce. Hundreds of everyday meals rely on that one ingredient. So when canned tomatoes become scarce, the impact spreads far beyond a single aisle. Prices have already climbed in many regions, and manufacturers are quietly shrinking can sizes while raising costs, hoping people won't notice. But once the shelves get hit by panic buying, no amount of price adjusting will slow the rush. During uncertain times, consumers gravitate toward foods that stretch meals and anchor recipes. Canned tomatoes do both perfectly. They turn cheap ingredients into complete meals. They store for years, and they're essential for anyone trying to cook on a tight budget. That's why, during previous disruptions, they disappeared faster than almost any other canned food. And with 2026 approaching, all the indicators point toward another year of stressed tomato supply, higher processing costs, and tighter inventories. Canned tomatoes are indeed disappearing because they read trendy, or rare they re-disappearing because they re-essential. And essential foods don't fade quietly. They vanish all at once, leaving families staring at empty shelves and wondering how something so simple suddenly became so hard to find. Number 9, salt. Salt is one of the oldest survival tools humanity has ever known, yet it's also one of the most overlooked. People walk past it assuming it will always be cheap, always be plentiful, always be sitting on the shelf waiting for them. But that confidence comes from forgetting the role salt once played in the world. Long before refrigerators, salt was the difference between food that spoiled overnight and food that lasted through an entire winter. It preserved meat, protected harvests, kept families alive, and held communities together. And even today, when technology feels advanced and grocery stores feel endless, salt still sits quietly at the center of food security, whether people notice it or not. The problem is that modern supply chains don't treat salt like a priority. Because it's cheap, stores don't stock massive quantities. Because it's heavy, companies avoid shipping at long distances unless absolutely necessary. And because it lasts forever, people don't think to buy extra until the moment a crisis hits. That combination is exactly why salt disappears faster than anyone expects during emergencies. One trigger, an economic shock, a prolonged blackout, a trucking slowdown, or even a regional disaster, and grocery shelves are stripped bare. Not because salt suddenly ran out globally, but because local supplies are tiny and fragile. Salt production itself isn't immune to trouble either. Many of the world's salt mines and sea salt harvesting regions have faced weather swings, labor shortages, transportation issues, and rising fuel costs. When fuel becomes expensive, salt becomes expensive to move. And when salt becomes expensive to move, stores quietly reduce their orders, hoping customers won't notice the missing bags on the lower shelf. But people do notice, just not until the shelf is already empty. The real danger is that salt isn't just a flavor in a crisis. It's a lifeline. It's needed for food preservation, hydration balance, emergency cooking, and long-term storage. Without it, fresh food spoils faster, and preserved food can't be made at all. Families who take salt for granted today will be the same ones searching desperately for it when 2026 brings the next wave of instability. The tragedy is that it costs almost nothing to store now, but becomes priceless the moment it's gone. And the people who understand that will be the ones who never feel the panic that empty shelves always bring. Number 10, powdered milk. Powdered milk is one of those foods people rarely think about unless they have children or bake often, but when you look closely at how the world handles dairy, you start to realize powdered milk is the backbone of countless homes. Families use it when refrigeration fails, bakeries depend on it, emergency kits require it, whole industries rely on it to stabilize food supply when fresh milk becomes unpredictable. But dairy has quietly entered one of the most unstable periods in modern history. Rising feed costs, shrinking farmland, extreme weather, and labor shortages have pushed dairy production to its limits. Fresh milk spoils quickly, so when output drops, manufacturers lean heavily on powdered milk to fill the gap. That extra pressure stretches a system that's already struggling to keep up. The deeper issue is that powdered milk isn't made in small batches. It requires large, highly specialized facilities capable of drying huge quantities of raw milk at precise temperatures. Those facilities are expensive to run, vulnerable to energy price swings, and tightly linked to global transportation routes. When even one part of the chain falters, the entire system slows. Some dairies have already reduced output because they can't afford feed or fuel. Others are dealing with unpredictable weather, destroying the crops needed to keep cows fed. And when fresh milk production dips, powdered milk availability collapses shortly after. People don't realize how quickly powdered milk disappears during a crisis until it's too late. When families panic, they don't reach for gourmet items. They reach for the foods that stretch, store, and support children. Powdered milk is at the top of that list. During past disruptions, shelves emptied in hours and prices doubled in days. What's concerning about 2026 is that the stress on the system hasn't eased. It has compounded. Every warning sign is louder than the last, and the industry is bracing for tighter supplies, higher processing costs, and reduced output. Powdered milk may look like a simple pantry item, but it represents security. It's the difference between having options and having none when refrigeration fails, when budgets shrink, or when fresh supplies run thin. And the people who wait for the shortage to reach the news will be far too late. This is one of those foods you buy before you think you need it, because once it vanishes, it doesn't come back quickly. The truth about these 10 foods isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up before the silence turns into panic. Every shortage begins quietly, long before the shelves empty and long before the headlines catch up. The world isn't ending, but it is shifting, and the people who stay calm during that shift are always the ones who prepared before the crowd noticed anything was wrong. These foods are still here today, still affordable, still within reach, but the window is closing. And when it finally shuts, preparation won't be possible, only regret.